This is the first of 5 classes during the month of January and the first week of February on Wednesday nights for Brentwood Oaks. And the study will be on the book of Genesis, chapters 1 through 11. There is a great deal of information and issues that we could confront and go over to benefit during the course of the study. I'm going to need to abbreviate virtually everything and ask you to bear with me as we look into truths that are foundational for theology, for all of biblical history, and for all of biblical literature. So I will do the best I can with this tremendously difficult section of Scripture, and I hope that you will find it helpful. Let me say, I believe that my notes for this class will be posted online as well, so that you will be able to benefit from following along with my notes. I will also have occasion to, as I share my computer, that you will be able to see some of these things as well as some images that I've gotten. So without further ado, let me begin by sharing the screen. These are my notes that you should be able to have access to, and I think Pam Fowler can get you access to these notes. Not a lot to say about these first couple of pages, except in terms of the structure of the book of Genesis that will be followed throughout the course of the next couple of months or few months. There are a couple of ways of understanding how the book of Genesis is laid out. One of those is simply by the story collections. In other words, most of Genesis 1 through 11 is called the primeval history, or history before there's history, so to speak, before writing. And that is the first 11 chapters. The next one would be in blue here, Abraham and Sarah, chapters 11 through 26, including the story of Isaac. And then the third one is the stories about Jacob, chapters 25 through 36. And then the final collection is the Joseph story, chapters 37 through 50. Another way of understanding the way the book of Genesis is laid out is in red here, and that is according to the structure of the books of generations, and that is the Toledot books, so-called, the generations of the various genealogies that are presented. And those are found in 10 places in the book of Genesis. That's another way of understanding the structure. So I don't want you to be confused about that. It'd be much easier to look at these collections of stories as units rather than look at all 10 of these books of generation, so to speak. But you'll have this if you, for your reference, if you should need. In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. As for the earth, it was chaos and waste. Darkness was upon the surface of the abyssal waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the abyssal waters. There's a great deal of information, critical information, in the very first 2 verses of the Bible. None of it is easy, and none of it is particularly straightforward for people of our time and of our culture. This is profound and yet simple. One of the more profound and simple statements in all of biblical literature. First, there is no speculation about what came before the beginning. And I've had many discussions of this with theologians and with church members for the last many decades. Nothing is said, and I don't think anywhere else in Scripture either, about what was before the beginning, what activities happened before the beginning. We may speculate, but it is simply that. I think the implication is that it may not be our business to know what God was up to before the beginning. The book of the Bible simply begins by saying, in beginning, God created. And that's where we begin as well. The second thing that comes to my mind is the grammar and the vocabulary and the syntax of verses 1 and 2 are not exactly straightforward for translation into English. How do we translate the very first phrase? In Hebrew, it's simply bereshit, which means something like in beginning. Should that be understood, though, as God was beginning, or after the beginning, or are the creation of the heavens and the earth in verse 1, do those equal the beginning? And secondly, where do the abyssal waters that the Spirit of God is hovering over come from? According to some scholars, it is the only thing not explicitly said to have been created. Is that a result of the creation in beginning in verse 1? Or is God simply ordering the stuff of chaos? And that is one of the most profound and early debates about the book of Genesis that exists. Is creation, therefore, from nothing, that is, by fiat, in Latin ex nihilo, out of nothing? Or is creation that God affects in Genesis 1 essentially ordering the stuff of chaos into ordered creation? And those are not simple, nor are they issues that are easily responded to, but I will give my best shot at it. A related question is, what is the character and function of verse 1? Is verse 1 a title for Genesis 1:1 through 2:4? In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth equals what the chapter is about. Therefore, it is a superscription or title. Or is it sequential? That is, in beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, verse 1. Then, verse 2, it was formless and void. Then, verse 3, God created light, etc. And the answer to this is by no means obvious either. My opinion is that in beginning, God created the heavens and the earth is the title of the chapter, and that is the title. And thus, here is how he did it in verses 2 and following. But there are a number of possible ways of understanding it. Now, related to whether God's creation in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4 is ex nihilo, out of nothing, or whether it is essentially ordering chaos, I think that is a false dichotomy. First, God baras, the Hebrew verb used 3 times in Genesis 1, is bara, to create, but bara occurs 1.5 or 24 times in Scripture, and it is only used of God's creative activity, never of a human. First of all, so only God can do it. Second of all, God never uses any instrumentality to aid him in creation. God doesn't use something to bring about creation. It is simply by fiat or out of nothing. So I think that is the first issue that has to be understood, that God baras, and it is out of nothing. On the other hand, the following days of creation do seem to be an ordering of that which is chaotic. We especially see that uh, at the end of this section in verse 2, and also in verse 3, where God creates light out of formlessness and void, and God separates chaos waters in day 2. God causes the dry land to emerge in day 3. And so there is something to be said also for God's creative activity, including ordering the stuff of chaos. And I think these are very important theologically and pastorally, that all power not only resides with God, he is not only able to create ex nihilo, out of nothing, but also he brings order to chaos. And I think that is one of the most profound early theological statements in Scripture that I think is quite pastoral. During a time of great unrest socially, global pandemic, one can still rely on a firm foundation of truth. That is, God still creates order out of chaos. There are a number of things we could take time for. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of time to spend on these. But I do want to say there is no explicit reference here to when God did this creative activity. Did it happen in 4004 BC, according to Bishop Ussher a few hundred years ago, his theory, or some other time in history? Did it occur in 4 billion BC, or 8 billion BC, or 13 billion BC, or some other time? I am a complete agnostic about when God did it. I'm a firm believer in that God did it. When? I don't know. According to one of my former colleagues, when asked, when did God create? He simply responded, long time ago. Well, when? Well, a long time ago. Well, how long? Quite long. And so that is basically where I also find myself. There is no mention in Scripture relative to when this happened, only that God is responsible. I think also that because Israel sprang up in the ancient Near East in a specific historical setting and context, that it is necessary that that the Israelites, ancient Israel, reflected its ancient context in the same way that we reflect the sensibilities and understandings of a modern scientific worldview. One ought not to think that Israel shared our same worldview in matters of science, philosophy, and many other issues. So I think it's helpful for us to compare. Of the many ancient Near Eastern creation epics that I could bring up, one particularly important one is the ancient Babylonian creation epic, that is the Enuma Elish, which means when on high. And let me skip over to something that mentions this. I'll come back to these pictures. In the Enuma Elish, creation begins when the chaos waters above merge with the chaos waters below. and form the very first gods, and they are Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu, a male deity, Tiamat, a female deity. They then become the progenitors of all the gods that follow, including the next two primordial gods, Lachmu and Lahamu, which mean mud and clay or something like that. Then other deities, which are largely nature deities, phenomena of nature, then emerge because of Apsu and Tiamat being the begetters of all the gods in the Babylonian pantheon that follow. The first thing to mention about this is relative to the biblical literature. God doesn't beget any gods. God has no spouse. God is not married. He has no gender. He doesn't beget deities that bring about his creative activity. In beginning, God says it all. Also, and I think this is equally important, God is not a part of, nor is he formed out of the chaotic stuff, the chaos and formless void, in Hebrew, tohu and bohu, of that pre-ordered chaos. But he is above it. He's beyond it. He's in no way bound or controlled by the stuff of creation, like Apsu and Tiamat, Lachmu and Lahamu are. Like the panel of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo in Italy, God does not touch his creation in Genesis 1, but hovers over it. He is sovereign over it, is not to be confused with what he has created, and is in no way bound by it. So let me move back to some of these pictures. We're going to be looking at a few of these. You may be wondering already at the cosmology, that is the worldview, the way they understood the universe to work. And I'll come back to this picture in a little bit as well, but one sees here immediately the waters above the dome of the heavens, the waters under the earth, and the dry land, as well as the heavens under the waters of creation. I'll come back to that. Verses 3 through 5. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God made a division between the light and the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Again, there are a number of things that need to be mentioned about this. Genesis 1:1 through 2:4 is very reticent to use anthropomorphic language to speak about God. Well, what is anthropomorphic language? It is human language, the language of human body parts, the language of referring to God in human terms. Now, in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, we'll see that God walks about in the garden in the cool of the day, that God plants a garden, that God fashions the man out of dirt, out of the dust of the ground, implying that God has human-like arms and legs and hands. There are other anthropomorphic or human-like terms related to sort of metaphorical body parts of God. One of the interesting things about Genesis 1:1 through 2:4, as opposed to the chapters that follow, also interesting, but Genesis 1:1 through 2:4, very different, is that the writer only allows God, only refers to God, better, with two anthropomorphic terms. That is, God speaks and God sees. These are anthropomorphisms that don't allow us to create any kind of idol. If God were to be captured in an image form, then we would need some kind of arms and legs and face, etc. But none of that does the author use in 1:1 through 2:4. Only the least anthropomorphic terms that he can come up with, and that is God speaks like a human, God sees like a human. And so God is depicted throughout this chapter as sovereign, Lord of creation, above it, beyond it, not to be confused with a human. And yet we must interpret God's presence and God's action in terms that we can understand. And so God speaking and God hearing, or God seeing rather, are the two methods that the author uses to enable us to understand what God has done in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4. Now, I have more to say about that next week when we talk about Genesis 2. So if you're confused by this, hold on, I'll get to it when I deal with Genesis 2. I think the symmetry of chapter 1 and chapter 2 is quite amazing and quite beautiful. And I think that confusion will be put to rest when I get there. Genesis 1, the first of God's creation, was not the primordial gods as in the Babylonian creation epic, or the creation of the dry land out of the chaos waters as in the Egyptian creation epic. The first creation of God is light. Note that even darkness exists only as the absence of light. And unlike some Eastern religions, which have eternal principles, eternally at war with each other, of good and evil, or darkness and light, light or darkness are subject to God and respond immediately to his command. God speaks, and there is light. Furthermore, God exerts sovereignty over his creation in all of these days by naming these phenomena. He refers to the light and names it. And another interesting feature here is light and not darkness is called good. An evangelical scholar named Gordon Wenham has said this about Genesis 1. This account of creation is a hymn to the Creator. Creation itself bears witness to the greatness and goodness of God. It may be noted that light and not darkness is noted as good. God is, as it were, prejudiced in favor of light. And we see that throughout Scripture, and a wonderful bookend is the very last chapter in the Bible, in Revelation, where the light of the sun, shines. There is no need of the sun. The light of the Lamb shines every day there. So we have kind of this wonderful bookend. There is a problem, not for the Bible, but a problem for our understanding, and that is, what do we mean when we use the word day? Days are only determined, in our view, by the movement of the earth around the sun and the rotation of the earth. This cosmology was not available and unknown to ancient Semitic peoples. Furthermore, we don't have the creation of the heavenly lights until day 4. This is what it says on day 4. God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the heavens to make a division between the day and the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. Let them be for lights in the dome of the heavens to give light upon the earth." I think that the writer is well aware that the heavenly lights determine day and night, but he is also aware that the creation of light is primary. So I think this may be a theological more than a scientific statement. How does one calculate days or time before there are heavenly bodies, such as the sun and moon and stars? In terms of how we can have a day without the heavenly bodies, obviously the word day is being used differently than perhaps we normally use it. I think that the word day, yom in Hebrew, is used in at least 3 different ways in Genesis 1 and 2. Sometimes it means at that time or when. Genesis 2:4, for example, in the day the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Well, he didn't make it in a day. There were 6 days of creation, but Bayom simply means in the day or when. Sometimes it simply means when. Genesis 2:17, in the day that you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. Well, he didn't die in that day, but it simply means when. I think it also can mean a period of time that's indeterminate. For example, especially relative to the first 3 days of creation, we have no sun, moon, and stars. We have no way to calculate time. And so I think that the best position is to be agnostic about what the length of time is, indeterminate. Also, a 24-hour period governed by the sun going down and coming up. Especially Genesis 2:2-3, the 7th day that God blesses the Sabbath because it is the 7th day. And that it becomes the 7th day of the week that is hallowed or consecrated to Israel. So I think a case can be made for there being 2 or 3 different uses of the term day. And that is simply to say we are not bound by any particular theory of time for when these creative activities occurred and how long it took for God to do it. He simply did it, and it took as long as it took. That's my position relative to that. Verses 6-8, God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it be a division between the waters." And God made the dome, and it was a division between the waters which were under the dome and the waters which were above the dome, and it was so. And God called the dome the heavens. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Not only is time understood a little differently in Genesis 1, but also cosmology, how the ancients understood and viewed the cosmos. We call it the universe. Notice that it is the cosmos understood from the perspective of people on the earth looking up. The dry ground is surrounded by waters. We have waters below the ground, waters surrounding the ground, and the waters above the heavens. Well, if I were an ancient, any idiot would know, looking up, where does the water come from? Well, it comes from up there. What color is the sky? It's blue. Rain, snow, hail, etc., come from up there. The chaos waters and the stable ground arising out of these waters defined their precarious existence. And so they appeal throughout Scripture for God to be a stable and firm refuge when the chaos thunders around them. Psalm 22 and Psalm 69 are wonderful examples of appeal to the God of order and stability for times when the waters seem to overwhelm. Also, Jonah chapter 2, Habakkuk, and many other passages that are similar. There is a kind, I would suggest, of bubble of organized existence in Scripture, which is, and the Hebrew word is eretz, which means world in the sense of cosmos, ordered existence surrounded by the chaos waters. Surrounded by waters above the dome of the heavens, the day 2, and waters below the dome of the heavens. The dome, I've translated it dome, rather than firmament. Firmament simply means firm, hard substance, something that keeps the chaos out, and is sometimes translated as firmament or expanse. In any case, it was conceived as a hard substance. That's what rakia means, a dome or bowl, which separated the waters above from the waters below and allowed organized existence to flourish. Now, let me go back to this map. This is one in the book Understanding the Old Testament by Bernard Anderson, and it's his picture. We see here, and if you can follow my little arrow here, here we have the dry land. You have subterranean waters. You have these waters above the heavens. This is the dome or bowl of the heavens here. And he also includes what we get in Job chapters 38 and 39, the storehouses of the rain, the snow, and the hail, and these floodgates of the heavens where God allows this precipitation to come down. Within the dome of the heavens, we have the heavens proper, the domain of the sun and moon and stars. Notice how different this is from our modern scientific view. But Scripture necessarily reflects the science and understanding of the ancient world. God lisped to them as a parent speaks in baby talk, let's say, to their small child. As God speaks to us in baby talk that we can understand. The one way I might amend this might be through this particular picture, and that is the waters above the heavens, the firmament here, the rakia, the dome, the domain of sun, moon, and stars, the dry ground, the underworld under the earth, and then the chaos waters also below. And so that might be a more satisfactory picture than the first one I gave.